I'll be buried in my grave before I become a slave, yeah. That is what I heard them say way back in the day. I'll be buried in my grave before I become a slave, yeah, yeah, yeah. But it seems like since that day, yeah, yeah, we have sorely changed. I'll be buried in my grave before I become a slave, yeah, yeah. That is what I heard them say, yeah. Way back in the day. I'll be buried in my grave, yeah, before I become a slave, yeah, yeah, yeah. But it seems like since that day, yeah, we have sorely changed. Whoa. Hey, hey. Whoa, oh, 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 whoa, oh, 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 oh.
And now, live from beautiful Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, you're watching My Fellow Americans with your host, Spike Cohen.
Yes! Yes, it's me! I'm back! It's been a week. Keep clapping. Clap for the miracle. Clap for the I survived Alaska miracle. How would we know that you're happy that I survived my time in Alaska if you didn't keep clapping? Welcome to My Fellow Americans. I am literally Spike Cohen. Folks, we have a really cool episode today. We're going to be talking about net neutrality, something that really hasn't been talked a lot about in the media. It was talked about a while back, but they haven't really been talking about it much. It's been kind of quietly happening under the radar, even though it could potentially affect the entire internet in a bad way. Well, that was a spoiler alert. I was going to wait to say whether it was good or bad. But anyway, thanks so much for joining us. This is a Muddied Waters media production. Check us out on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, Anchor, all the podcasting platforms. We're on Twitter, Periscope. We're on everything. Check us out everywhere. Go to anchor.fm/muddiedwaters to leave us messages that we answer on Tuesday nights. Go to, and you can donate money to us there if you want to. I didn't tell you had to, but you can. Check us out everywhere and go to muddywatersmedia.com to follow all of our episodes. And be sure to like this, share this, follow it, subscribe to it, whatever it is that you are watching or listening to this on. Be sure to let everyone know just how much you appreciate and enjoy it. Big Tech does not want you to see this. I don't know if that's true, but I'm going to say it because that might make you more likely to share it. So share it, because the last thing I want is for you and your loved ones to miss out on a roughly hour-long libertarian podcast on a Wednesday evening. Give the gift of Spike Cohen today. Kids love it. This episode, of course, is brought to you by the Libertarian Party Waffle House Caucus, the fastest growing waffle-related caucus in the Libertarian Party or any other party in any other country, actually. I haven't checked that, but it has to be true. Become a member today by going to the Facebook group Libertarian Party Waffle House Caucus. And you become a duly seated voting member, whatever that means, by going to muddywatersmedia.com/store and buying either a Waffle House Caucus button or a Waffle House Caucus hat. I think we have a shirt. Actually, I don't remember if we have a hat now, but we have a shirt and we have and a button, so be sure to do that today. This episode is also brought to you by the Gravy King, and it's brought to you by Nug of Knowledge, smokable CBD products. Nug of Knowledge is not your everyday CBD supplier because a portion of the profits go to help end the war on drugs. They also have a compassionate use program that donates medicinal hemp products to veterans and people with disabilities who cannot afford these natural remedies. Many people who say it who use it say that it helps with joint pain, stress relief, or even a much needed pick me up. So if you went through all of your smokable CBD supplies yesterday for that day, that special holiday, then be sure to go to nugofknowledge.com to buy some more smokable CBD and use checkout code SPIKE for 10% off. Smokable CBD, that's what we call it now. This episode is also brought to you by Joe Solosky, running for Pennsylvania governor. Joe Solosky is the key to Pennsylvania's success. And if you want to help him in his run as a libertarian for governor of Pennsylvania, you can go to Joe Solosky, JoeSoloski.com, and see how you can help him. He's a fantastic guy. And this episode is also brought to you by where's the other thing? Oh, Chris Reynolds, personal injury attorney, Chris Reynolds, attorney at law. If you find yourself personally injured in Florida, I'm so sorry. But you might be able to sue them. And if you think that that's something you'd like to do, it's your personal opinion. You can certainly do it. Go to chrisreynoldslaw.com, and when you wake up from whatever they did to you, Chris will be there waiting. Well, I don't know if he'll be physically there in your hospital room or whatever, but he'll be there waiting somewhere for you, and he will help you get the money that you need and deserve. chrisreynoldslaw.com. By the way, I make no guarantees that he'll be able to get you money, but if anyone can, it'll be him. The intro and outro music to this and every single episode of My Fellow Americans comes from the amazing and talented Mr. Joe Davi. That's Jodavi. Check him out on Facebook. Check him out on his SoundCloud. Go to his Bandcamp at jodavimusic.bandcamp.com. Buy his entire discography. He is an incredibly talented musician. It's like $25 for the discography. Go buy it. It's great. All the great music that you could ever listen to. Thank you so much, Mr. Joe Davi. I'd like to thank Le Bleu, purified drinking water, for this. We already determined in the last episode that I'm very wrong about hydrogen and oxygen. I thought it was 33% hydrogen and 66% oxygen, and it turns out that's not how chemistry works. But this is the correct proportions of hydrogen and oxygen, which I'm relieved to know because I've been drinking it for years. There's nothing wrong with this. This is not GMO water. It's actually very good water. Thank you so much to Le Bleu, Bluvanaka. I should have opened this ahead of time. Shout out to Tehran Turks and Turks' mom and him as always. Folks, my guest tonight is the Director of Technology and Innovation Policy for the Pelican Institute for Public Policy, which is a free market think tank based out of Louisiana that advocates for things like government transparency, school choice, lower taxes, and much more. All stuff we like. He is a political economics major from Tulane University. He has written quite a bit extensively about everything from occupational licensing reform to government regulation of social media. He's here with us today to share his expertise on net neutrality and on the Biden administration kind of quietly planning to bring it back and what that means for us. So, ladies and gentlemen, my fellow Americans, without any further ado, please join me in welcoming my guest tonight. My guest and is your guest too tonight, Mr. Eric Peterson. Eric, thanks so much for being on the show.
Yeah, thanks for the great interest. Like, I got to ask you a question right off the bat. You talked a little bit about donations. Can I donate my Dogecoin to you?
Yes, you can convert it to US dollars and donate it to me. I want to buy every time on my list of things to do on the not important part. I always have buy $100 worth of Dogecoin, and I still haven't done it. And every time it goes up, I'm like, I should have done that. But yes, if you, I will make a Dogecoin wallet just so you can donate if you'd like. But thanks so much for coming, man.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here. Long time listener to the show, first time participant, right?
Yeah, no, this is awesome. And folks, be sure to comment with your thoughts and questions, and Eric and I will tell you if you are right or wrong. Now, Eric, before we get started, I'm interested to know that I had heard of the Pelican Institute, but I didn't know a lot about them. Obviously, prior to this show, I've been reading up on them and on what you've been doing with them. I think you're doing some fantastic stuff. Tell us the genesis story of how you got involved in the Pelican Institute and what you're doing over there.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure a lot of your listeners are like familiar with DC think tanks, right? Like the Cato Institute or Heritage Foundation. There's actually a great network of state-based free market think tanks around the country who are in state capitals every day, fighting for free market policies, from, like you said, school choice, lower taxes, we're really fighting down on our tax code right here. The Pelican Institute is just one of these great organizations, but they've given me a great opportunity to do something a little different that a lot of think tanks are getting into, but haven't gotten into yet, which is technology policy. We know how important innovation is to the well-being of all Americans. But Louisiana is kind of lagging behind. So it is my goal to make Louisiana a place that is more friendly to innovation. Maybe we can talk a little bit about that. We just passed some great legislation out of the House on rural broadband, on something called regulatory sandboxes. It's going to make it easier for me to donate to your campaign in Dogecoin, but maybe we'll save that for the end. But that is what we're doing down here at the Pelican Institute, fighting for freedom every day in the fine state of Louisiana.
I actually would like to talk about that more if time allows. One cool thing that happened last year in this is going around campaigning, and even after the campaign, I don't know if you know, I ran for vice president last year. It's a little thing. It's a side project I did. But when I was doing that, I got to meet all these really cool people that were part of these think tanks and lobbying groups and stuff based out of like in this individual states. And so it was really cool because, like you said, we've all heard of Cato, we've all heard of the Heritage Foundation, we've all heard of these DC based think tanks and lobby groups. Some are good, many are not good, but we've heard of them. But yet, we're actually much more likely to be acutely affected by local and state policy than we are by federal policy. Sometimes the federal policy trickles down to the state and local level, but at the end of the day, it's what is happening locally that matters a lot more. So it's good to see that there are folks like y'all that are doing this kind of stuff. And if time allows, I'd certainly love to dive into what you guys are doing there, because I think it's great. Everything that, like I said, my very brief perusal of the Pelican Institute, I really couldn't find anything I didn't like. But getting back to this issue with net neutrality. Now, the very, very quick primer is net neutrality is a regulation. It was introduced under the Obama administration through the FCC. It was repealed during the Trump administration by the FCC, and now there is increasing talk of it being reintroduced at the federal level. And in the meantime, California and possibly some other states introduced it during the time at the state level during the time that it was not in the federal level. But let's talk about that. What exactly is net neutrality? Because we hear a lot of emotional responses on both sides, especially on the pros side. But let's give us a little brief rundown. What exactly is net neutrality? What was the purpose behind it? What did it end up leading to? Talk to us about that.
Yeah, net neutrality is probably one of the least understood policy areas that most people have probably heard about. Yeah. Net neutrality isn't actually a policy that was passed by the FCC at all. Okay. Net neutrality is a theory put forth by Tim Wu, who is I believe now just got onto the FTC, or that process is going through. And it's a pretty simple concept. All it says is when a carrier, whether it's Comcast, AT&T, WISP, Starlink, is moving internet traffic, that they treat all that internet traffic equally. So this stream right now that is going out to all the people is treated the same as somebody streaming from Netflix, same as sending an email, watching YouTube, et cetera, et cetera. So it's sort of this theory about how the internet should work, right? They sort of call that like the dumb pipe theory, right? That the internet carrier doesn't know what's going on. This is really similar to telephone services, right? Kind of back in the day, you and I are old enough to remember landline telephones. Maybe some people watching here aren't.
Isn't that depressing? There are adults who don't remember what landline telephones are like, but yes, go ahead.
That is how fast communications technology is moving. Absolutely. They probably don't remember my bell, or this stuff being broken up, or dial tones, or any of that crazy stuff. But that's how telephone services are treated, right? Common carriers that if you and I are having a conversation on a phone line, it's not given any sort of priority access over your mom and my mom talking about watching us right now on Facebook, and who's doing a better job and who's more handsome and all that good stuff, right? Right. So that's sort of that. What actually happened in 2015 is something known as Title II regulation of the internet. And that is that kind of common carrier provision that says that we're going to treat the internet service like your electricity, like the telephone, like your water, like it is going to be treated as a utility. Part of that is like the net neutrality, part of it is of how you treat data moving over that. But it is far more than just passing a law that's saying you have to treat all internet traffic equally, which is what people think it is if they have any sort of insight into the policy at all, if they kind of looked into it.
Okay, so that's where I was hoping you would get at, is net neutrality is the idea that all packets of data that are going through the internet should be treated the same, which, correct me if I'm wrong, that's how it has been. I mean, that there hasn't ever been a widespread example of data being treated substantively differently. Am I incorrect in that?
So, yeah, I mean, we can get into whether or not it's throttling or something like that. But I think a bigger question is like, do we want all like data packets to be treated equally, right? We just got out of a pandemic or getting out of a pandemic, right? Where kids are like virtual schooling, telehealth. Like maybe that needs to take slight like microsecond level priority over things like streaming Netflix, being on YouTube, this stream is sending an email. That's sort of like basic network management, right? Is making sure like the important things go through first and the things that can wait a half second to your email kind of go after that. The sort of concern about net neutrality, right, is that if you would have certain companies like throttling content, meaning that Facebook would load slower, YouTube would load slower, Netflix would load slower because it had some sort of financial incentive to prioritize some content over the others. As far as that goes, there's like maybe one example that happened in 2007 that people sort of go back to. But if you want to talk about how much the internet has changed since 2007,
right,
it is a significant amount. Then there's sort of no, big smoking gun for throttling that, these internet carriers can't be trusted with our content and they're going to destroy the open internet as we know it today.
Well, and also, I mean, keep in mind, like you said, the last big, example happened 14 years ago. So this isn't exactly like a long running issue or an issue that's, a chronic issue. But also, you mentioned, microsecond differences. This is not the difference between something streaming in a matter of, fractions of a second versus minutes. This is whether a page took 2 seconds to load or 4 seconds to load or something like that. So even in the examples of why this needs to happen, this is not the dramatic thing that it's being sold as, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, maybe we can get into this later about how well the American system held up during COVID-19. But if you talk about throttling, right, it's, the European Union has passed all these regulations on tech as they are wont to do, right? They heavily regulate their tech sector, which is why the only large tech company to come out of Europe these days is Spotify, the only unicorn company kind of in the top 50. Is because of the regulation, but they have kind of these strong net neutrality provisions, right, that prevent you from throttling content or doing that sort of thing. But of course, that means that people were less likely to invest in the network because with regulations comes increased costs. We can get into some of those numbers, but during the early days of the pandemic, when everyone was staying home, European regulators told Facebook that they would have to throttle their content. Too many people were streaming in high def. And important things that needed to happen were getting slowed down. So the government actually sort of imposed this. Meanwhile, across the pond, where we had repealed net neutrality and apparently killed the internet 2 years ago, people were watching Tiger King in 4K and, convinced that Carol Baskin had murdered her husband.
Yeah, so I mean, if nothing else, we now know the truth about Carol Baskin. But question here, you mentioned that net neutrality is not. We're being told that all they did was, it's being implied that all they did was make sure that the internet is a fair place for everyone, and that they've made neutral treatment of all packets of data. But like you said, that's not even the beginning of what they did, or that's just the beginning of what they did. Talk to us about Title II, and I don't want to give a spoiler alert, but tell us if the government treating the internet like a utility is good or bad, and why that would be.
Yeah, well, I mean, we don't even have to go to the hypothetical, right? We can kind of look back in time. And believe it or not, the internet's not that old, but it's been under different regulatory structures. For those of you who are around our age, I got DSL service. Was really excited about that. It was much faster than sort of like the modem 56K. You didn't have to deal with the beeping sound and all that good stuff. Um, so that actually, DSL service used to be considered under Title II, and then that changed. The FCC said, no, we're actually going to treat it as a data service. And what you saw is a major uptick in investment and DSL service, a major uptick in people subscribing to that service, and more people getting connected to the internet. And so, we sort of had a firsthand example of, getting rid of this common carrier status, right? The FCC over the last 30 years, the story has been one of deregulation. And as they have deregulated, again, we're telling kind of these old timey stories like 15, 20 years ago. And you would think we were talking about 80 years ago by how fast the technology has improved.
And that's as a direct reflection of the fact that the government has increasingly just gotten out of the way of the providers and the internet. So you said you had some numbers, tell us some specifics about what happened when Title II was introduced in 2015, and then what happened after it was repealed 2 years later. Besides the fact, again, spoiler alert, the internet did die. Rest in peace to the internet. 1980 something to 2017. Big ups to the homie, the internet. But other than that, what were the differences when it got introduced and then when it was repealed?
Yeah. So there's been a great study to kind of look at the talk about net neutrality or Title II and investment. Generally, I'm sure as all your smart listeners know, the government starts to get involved in something and start talking about regulation, and people start to get a little squeamish, right? Investing in broadband is a really expensive thing. Over the past 25 years, private industry in the United States has put $1.8 trillion into broadband investment, right? This is why 96% of the people across the country have some kind of cable provider to their home. So back in 2010, sort of the beginning of the Obama administration, kind of right after we got out of the Great Recession, started talking about this. There was a study done. I want to make sure I get this number right. Found between 2011 and 2015, investment fell 20 to 30%, or about 30 to 40 billion dollars annually in investment. That was just from like the FCC sort of kicking the idea around of Title II investment. And during as Title II was put into place until it was repealed by Ajit Pai, we saw a lot of the same sort of things, right? Investment sort of dropped off because there's less of a profit motive. And, if you think that the government is going to take over the billions of dollars that you put in the infrastructure, you are less likely to invest. Who could have guessed?
That's an utter shocker. And then obviously when it was repealed, we then saw an uptick in investment that happened as a result of that. And sort of we're in a bit of a internet renaissance right now in terms of, the new provisions and new types of services and things that are coming on deck. So, and that's not obviously the only a result of the repeal of Title II, but certainly a big part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll just give one thing. U.S. broadband speeds increased 91% from 2019 to 2020. So on average, you basically saw a doubling of speeds across the entire United States. Again, like this could not have come at a better time, right? Like nobody knew we were about to be in a global pandemic and be locked down. Right. But had we kept in Title II, I doubt severely we would have seen these sorts of improvements. That's not to say the digital divide is not real. That is something we work a lot on at the Pelican Institute. A lot of states with rural populations, struggle to get online. We can talk a little bit about Starlink and some of the great innovations there. Right. So I don't want to say everything is perfect and we have 100% coverage. That's not the case. But if you do have coverage and we're continuing to see investment, chances are that your speeds are going through the roof to kind of take account of everything that you're doing online, whether it's us talking on Facebook Live right now, whether it's your kid going to school virtually, whether it's working from home, or streaming. What's on Netflix these days? I don't know where the kid's watching. I'm watching Godzilla vs. Kong on HBO. I'm really excited for it.
I'm told that I need to be watching, and I immediately forgot it, so I probably won't be watching it unless it's accidentally. I so rarely watch TV anyway, but it was, oh man, the Chicago 7, I think it's called.
Oh, yeah, the new movie out on Netflix. Yeah, I think it got nominated for a lot of Oscars. Very excited.
Yeah, Yeah, and the problem is I'm very contrary. So when people tell me you need to watch something, I'm like, never gonna watch it. People told me in 2007 you should watch The Office. That really seems like your kind of humor, and I'm like, just for that, I'll never watch it. And then I didn't start watching it until like 2017, and I watched like the whole thing on Netflix, and I'm like, why did I punish myself with not watching The Office for 10 years? Anyway, so this is what happens when the throttle is let off by government, when it allows the market to provide. And there's also corollary effects to this, right? So like if we have more easy and cheap and plentiful ability for people to telecommute, and bosses, and we've seen this with the pandemic, but a lot of these telecommute jobs aren't going back to in person. The businesses are realizing that the meetings they were having every day weren't necessary, that having all these people come to an office space that they're having to pay for upkeep for isn't necessary. They're just as productive, if not more, from home. Their quality of life is higher. They're happier with their job. Like it's better overall. That also leads to lower energy prices because people aren't having to do these unnecessary commutes back and forth just to go and sit in an office and do what they could do from home. It leads to more time with family because you're at home. You're not having to spend that commute time. It leads to more free time. It leads to all these great things that happen when we're able to better utilize technology. Now, Eric, interestingly enough, it seems like most of, if not all of the major big tech carriers are 100% behind reintroducing Title II. And the exception seems to be the carriers. So, for example, like AT&T, Verizon, and so forth seem to be against it. And this feels like a crony warfare thing. Like the lobbies are fighting in DC and state capitals around the country over which lobby wins. But I don't really care which lobby wins. What I do care about is we're often told that, well, if a industry supports something, that means it's good. And yet we're talking about how this is bad for the internet, and yet most of the major providers in the internet support it. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to throw any tech company sort of under the bus, but I think we are seeing a big fracturing of Silicon Valley. And of course, some of the carriers you might not qualify them as Silicon Valley, but the sort of infighting, I think of pushing government for some sort of regulation that will benefit them and sort of harm their competitor.
Right.
Is something more and more of. Traditionally, Silicon Valley had been we're just let us innovate. Let the best man win. And in some ways, despite the fact that people think of Silicon Valley as a very liberal sort of place, right? They had a very kind of capitalistic ethos, right? They wanted to innovate. They wanted to make $1 billion and start this great new company and serve all these people. And they have for a lot of ways, right? Facebook, Zoom, Google, we can go on and on and on. But you're seeing sort of these battle lines being drawn, and net neutrality is certainly one of those battle lines where, like you said, a lot of the content providers are sort of fighting the carriers over this. And part of it is because they're big users of bandwidth, right? They wanted to make sure that they could continue to eat up really large chunks of bandwidth and without really having to pay anything extra for it. And net neutrality is one way to do that, right?
So I mean, there is that aspect to it, but it seems like that, again, that's just the net neutrality part. If they're supporting all of Title II, which essentially puts a chokehold back on investment in the internet, it seems like at least long term and possibly even short term, that would hurt a lot of these big tech companies. And yet they seem to almost uniformly support it. And I'm not expecting you to throw a specific company under the bus, and there's not really a need to, because we're talking about nearly an entire industry that's, at least with the exception of the carriers and some outliers, most of all the major players, Mozilla and Facebook and Microsoft and all these different companies, they're supporting the reintroduction of Title II, and it seems kind of counterintuitive. Do you think that this wouldn't be the first time that, an industry supports regulations that ultimately hurts it, but do you think there's an ulterior motive? Do you think that it only hurts the disruptors and kind of helps the cronies? Or do you think this is just like bad idea? They're just or supporting something that is ultimately harmful to them?
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't know if that it's ultimately going to be harmful to their bottom line, but companies often can sort of look in their short-term interests, right? They can't
Right.
necessarily see 10 or 15 years down the road. Sometimes they do, right? You talk about Amazon, right? That was a company that saw 10 to 15 years down the road and the
Mm-hmm.
rise of e-commerce, and now they're one of the most fabulously wealthy companies in the world. Or
Right.
SpaceX, right? Another company that sort of looked in the future, but not all companies sort of act that way. And we can also get into this. I know I prepared some tweets to read about net neutrality, but it became such a culture war issue, right? You would see people on Reddit sort of saying that if we get rid of net neutrality, that Reddit will go down and it'll destroy everything. And sort of at that point, a lot of these companies sort of got boxed into a corner, right? Maybe they were sort of iffy on net neutrality, they don't want to get
Right.
into it. But when the internet legions sort of like you have to support net neutrality if you support an open internet. If you're a company that has users and you want to make them happy and signal to them that you support open internet, you kind of had to support net neutrality.
So there is a virtue signaling aspect to it, because at moments it felt like when Microsoft on June 1st puts up their rainbow version of their logo, and then on the evening of June 30th, it puts up it puts back the regular logo. They did their 30 days of allotted LGBT acceptance or whatever. Not any actual demonstration of acceptance of anyone, but just the sort of like, well, I as a corporation am doing this, allotted virtue signaling period, and making a couple, posts about it during that time or whatever. And there was kind of a feeling of the same type of element in the messaging about net neutrality. They'd say, we support an open internet. And it's like, okay, is there someone out there going, no, we support a closed internet besides the Chinese government? But I mean, was there another side going, no, close the internet? Or was it, so? I mean, it was kind of there was a cultural aspect to it as well.
Yeah, I think absolutely right. When you would see some of these tweets go out and you realize like they're not talking about net neutrality at all or Title II regulation, right?
Right.
That sort of stuff like all goes over people's heads. It's one of the things you sort of learn in policy, right? Is most people, if they pay attention to your policy at all, they see it at a 10,000-foot level, and that's where the messaging becomes so very important. But
Sound bites,
you're lucky when you sort of have principled people who understand the policy, understand the effects of it, and are sort of willing to push against the grain, for the right reasons. But those people are few and far between, unfortunately, sometimes.
Yeah, most people, they want sound bites, and it's one thing that I learned over the last few years is I prefer this type of conversation where we can actually delve into stuff. Most people, it's like, tell me this in 10 seconds and do your best to appeal to my emotion while you're saying it, or you might lose me in second 4. And it's it's unfortunate, but that is the reality of how these things have to happen. So this could be an example where this. The government and cronies are pushing a cultural message, or pushing a message through the culture that's ultimately pursuing a really a ruinous policy in Title II. Now, what is it seems like there's indications that Joe Biden does want to move forward on this. He's being very quiet about it, interestingly enough, but and the administration in general is. But what are some of those examples of those, I guess, evidence or hints that he's pushing forward on this?
Yeah, Tom Wheeler, who was the FCC chairman at the end of the Obama administration, who had put forth the Title II regulations, has sort of been spending a lot of time talking about it again. The FCC, for those who don't know, is a body made up of 5 commissioners, one of whom is a chairman. And the sort of party that has the executive branch has a 3-2 sort of advantage there. So right now it is currently 2-2. Joe Biden has not put forth another FCC chairperson. So I think a lot will learn from the Biden administration by who he puts there, right? Is it somebody who's vowed to put back net neutrality? Or is it somebody who, cares much more about closing the digital divide or opening up spectrum? Some of the great stuff we can talk about the FCC doing to make the internet a better, more open, freer place. So I think that will tell us a lot about it. We can get into California, who's been working on it, but the Biden administration has been quiet on it, though they also have not been quiet on the broadband front. So we can perhaps talk a little bit. But government is trying to get into your internet network that is not Title II regulations, because there's some of that stuff going on too.
Yeah, well, we've seen, Joe Biden, the tweets X is infrastructure. So in this infrastructure bill, which infrastructure was always meant, roads and bridges and maybe the electrical grid, and now they've just started adding everything. Everything is infrastructure. Every single thing is infrastructure, including the internet. So everything needs to be added to this massive pork bill. What could possibly go wrong? Now, you had mentioned before, we have some examples of really just cringy tweets from politicians and pundits about net neutrality. Let's hear some of these so we can get, we've gotten some actual like scholarly discussion about what this is. Let's hear what politicians usually have to say about this kind of stuff.
Yeah. So Minnesota's been in the news recently. So we've got former Senator Al Franken. He goes, I've called net neutrality the free speech issue of our time. It embraces our most basic constitutional freedoms. It is vital to our democracy. I think when most people think about free speech issues on the internet right now, sort of net neutrality is probably not on the top of that list. So we've got Senator Ed Markey out of Massachusetts. If the FCC kills net neutrality, the internet will never be the same. We've got Bernie Sanders. Once again, the Trump administration sides with big money against democracy. If this passes, the internet and its free exchange of information, as we have come to know it, will cease to exist.
It existed for 2 years. I just want to say on those last two tweets, this existed for 2 years.
Yep. Yeah. So
it will end the internet.
Yeah. And NBC News had one. Ending net neutrality will destroy everything that makes the internet great.
Wow.
GQ, how the FCC killing of net neutrality will ruin the internet forever. We had, of course, the famous sort of Banksy tweet where he sort of put that you were going to have to pay, $1.99 per Google search. You're going to have to pay $5 for every Netflix movie you watched. That got shared like 100,000 times. The Senate Democrats, I went and looked up this today. It is still out there. You can Google it. They have this tweet where it says something to the effect of, if we end net neutrality, Twitter will load one word at a time. And they sort of put a giant space between all of it. And of course, Twitter is not loading one tweet at a time or one word at a time. It is loading faster than ever, as a matter of fact.
Yeah.
So please go to Twitter and, like and share this great podcast.
Well, yes, like and share this podcast and recognize that it's not being loaded. If it is being loaded one tweet at a time, one word at a time, then you probably need to reset your router. I'm just, those tweets, it requires, and it shows who their audience is. Their audience is people that have absolutely no idea what's being talked about. So when you hear this will end the internet, you go, my God, they can't do this. It'll end the internet. Well, no one mentions the fact that, or they certainly didn't mention the fact that this didn't exist until 2015. The internet was perfectly fine. Before that, has been perfectly fine since then. No reason to think that any of that. I love Bernie Sanders. I love his attacks on big money while he rakes in hundreds of millions of dollars. But this is especially ironic because he's saying they've sided with big money. Almost the entire big tech sector is at least 85% of the big tech sector, as well as corporate media. NBC News is 100% behind reintroducing this. But that's not big money. That's good people. Big money is the ones who want the internet to be free. Let's have a bit of a palate cleanser here. Let's talk a little bit about some of the good things you had mentioned: bridging the digital divide, increasing bandwidth, and things like that. Let's talk about some of the good things that have been coming out of the FCC and your take on whether that's going to continue under the Biden administration.
Yeah, and foremost, let me just give a huge shout out to Ajit Pai, who of course was the main driving force in revoking net neutrality, one of the best government officials we've had in a long time. Certainly one of the most memeable ones, right, with his giant Reese's coffee mug, which you can now go bid on. It is an NFT. There's an NFT of Ajit Pai looking at a picture of himself holding up his Reese's mug with his Reese's mug. If that is not innovation, I don't know what is. It's great. He's doing it for a good cause. So give him a follow and go bid on his NFT. But yeah, I think outside of net neutrality, right? I think his chairmanship was marked by actually really good bipartisanship. Tom Wheeler kind of before him wouldn't put out his agenda beforehand. A Jeet Pie would put it out like a month and a half beforehand. So everyone knew what was going to be voted on, what was coming up. They worked really well with Democrats in freeing up wireless spectrum. For those of you who don't know what wireless spectrum is, it makes your cell phone work, it makes your Wi-Fi work, it gives you 5G, all those sort of great things that, when we're a more mobile society, right, we're all expect to have the internet in our pockets all the time. And we can only do that because of spectrum. And and it's kind of infinite wisdom. 20, 30 years ago, the FCC took a lot of spectrum. They gave it to sort of favorite organizations who, what do you know, didn't spend a lot of time developing the spectrum because they didn't really have a profit motive or incentive to do so. So the FCC has spent a lot of time, again, in a very bipartisan, safe manner, clawing back a lot of that spectrum, making it available for private use. The C-band, which is going to be vital for 5G. It just has every characteristic you need to get fast internet across the country. They recently auctioned it off. They raised $80 billion. Most government entities spend $80 billion. The FCC gave $80 billion voluntarily from corporations back to taxpayers from auctioning off the spectrum. And that investment will go to make sure that your cell phone works faster, to make sure that the Internet of Things goes, to make sure that America is a 5G leader when it comes to China. That's some of the great stuff that you saw out of that FCC. Brendan Carr has recently put out a spectrum calendar. It's the first time that I know of a commissioner doing this, saying, hey, look, we got to keep freeing up the spectrum. Wireless is where we're going. We need to make as much of it available as possible, and when wanting to work with the rest of the commissioners on the FCC. And I certainly wish him good luck as they go forward and do that. And of course, I think something that every good libertarian loves SpaceX and all that good stuff. They worked really hard on their sort of orbital debris rules to kind of get Starlink up and going, right? Satellite internet, if it existed before, had a really terrible latency, which just translates to you really can't use it for things like gaming or video streaming or video conferencing, right? It just is not set up for that. When they reworked their rules, Starlink is now saying that they will have 100 megabits per second download speed and 20 megabits per second upload speed across the United States by 2022. Again, as sort of, the advocates of net neutrality would say, the internet is just like a utility, right? You're only going to get one provider. There's no way we can have competition in this market. The only way we can do it is have government kind of get involved and set price controls and regulate what's going where. That's just how it's got to be. And, in like a year and 8 months, everyone will have access to, at minimum, one provider, but most likely 2 or 3. That's the kind of great stuff that we've seen on the innovation from opening up spectrum and reducing regulations. And really, again, the digital divide is real and something that needs to be, dealt with. I think states can play a very important role on that, but, we're seeing it kind of close faster than ever. And, thank goodness.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought this up, the theory about utilities. The theory, and I don't even believe it with things that it's much more appropriate to, but the theory of government needing to get involved with utilities is that, for example, if you think of something like water and sewer or electricity, or things like that, and honestly, I don't even agree with electricity, but let's say water and sewer or with roads and things like that, they'll say, well, it's not really feasible to have multiple providers. You can't have multiple water providers, at least not through the pipe system, because there's one single pipe system. You can't have all these different competing pipe systems or competing sewer lines and things like that. Although more and more people are getting their water from delivery services, but that's a whole other subject. In terms of getting it like for tap water and for potable water uses and things like that, the idea is that it's not really possible, and so the government needs to come in and sort of create a provider or deeply regulate the provider that's there, and tell them what their options are. Now, again, with electricity, it increasingly is not the case, because you can have both a power grid and you can also have people that are getting their own power off grid. You can also now increasingly there are natural gas lines being buried and dug through all sorts of parts of the country. We started seeing that here in the Myrtle Beach area, and there are small generators that can actually use the natural gas to generate electricity on site for the homes and businesses. So even that is increasingly not true. The internet, there is no reason when you can get internet from land sources like cable and DSL and dry loop. You can get it from your phone carrier. You can eventually get it from satellite services. There's no reason. There are a few services that can be provided in more different ways than the internet. If there is one example of something that doesn't need to be regulated because competition, if allowed to exist, will move prices down and move innovation up, the internet is that example. We've been watching it since the 80s, that the internet went from sort of this DARPA project and then an intranet that was being used mostly for small electronic communications to now like us doing an HD live stream on multiple platforms, and that's happened inside of a generation. There's no argument that the government needs to be involved in this in any real way.
Yeah, I mean, if you go back to sort of like where the FCC, why they're involved in this in the first place, right? It had to do with over telephone lines for people who sort of remember dial-up, but that was sort of the theory on why we needed Ma Bell, right? It was impractical to have more than one phone line
Right.
For long distance calls. And so the best way is to have the government kind of be a rate maker, again, a common carrier, kind of what we were talking about. Then, the FCC started to get deregulatory, broke it up. And now like the idea that we would pay money to call people in Europe is crazy. I remember, commercials, right? You could call at night and you could get better like minute rates by calling people abroad, right? Now I go on my phone and use WhatsApp and I can talk to them and see their face and they can walk me around their house and HD streaming like instantaneously. And that sort of happened because they, went to deregulation. It didn't start with the internet, it started with the phone carriers, right? There's a reason that AT&T is also a major sort of, internet provider, right? They were in the phone game first, which is sort of where this technology came from. But like you said, the change in internet technology has gotten so great over the time, and it doesn't sort of have those problems of water and electricity where you need a physical thing to move data, right? We figured out how to move it over wireless spectrum. That's not to say that fiber isn't very important. Fiber is the backbone of America's internet network. There's always a wire somewhere that transmits the data, but wireless is an increasingly important part of that. I would also say, I live in New Orleans, where I get gig internet speed for $50 a month and HBO Max for free. My water bill is often higher than that. My energy bill is often twice that. Those are both sort of regulated industries. So I wish my electricity and sewer worked as well as my internet did, in the city of New Orleans.
Yeah, I'm trying to pull up a photo of what the Ma Bell phone looked like for decades.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if your viewers have seen that where they put the old rotary phone in front of Zennials, and they're like, "How do you make a phone call on this?" And they sort of can't figure it out.
Yeah, it's incredible. Here, I found this one because then there was the first one that came out in like the 50s, and we had it for 30 years. This was the phone that you got. If you show this to like your grandparents, guys, they're gonna have PTSD from it. This phone was the phone. What's that?
My grandmother still has that phone.
Yeah, this phone was the phone that you could get for decades. Like decades, this was the only thing you could get. And then, in an absolute groundswell of innovation, about 35 years after this phone came out, they replaced it with this one. It had buttons instead of rotary. Like, And this was the phone until they started breaking up Ma Bell. And then suddenly you had all these different phones. You had wireless phones. And I don't mean wireless phones as in like cell phones. I mean wireless phones as in the receiver could be taken from the actual hub, the phone itself, and you could walk around that room. And eventually you could walk into other rooms. And then one day they had this brick looking thing. It was a lot bigger than this. And they went, yeah, you can use this anywhere. It's going to cost you a fortune. And then eventually that became smaller and cheaper. And now I got this thing. They've actually grown in time, but it's because now they're also computers and HD cameras on both sides, and they're GPS enabled, and you can do everything on this, almost everything you could do on a computer. And that all happened in the same amount of time that we went from this to this. That's the difference between government being the rate, rate provider, the rate checker, and the common carrier, or designating a crony common carrier, and just letting people compete. And it's mind blowing that that's not the standard way of doing things. Now, Eric, talk to me about what Starlink and what satellite internet and what this new innovation of internet means for people that are far from the grid, people in Appalachia, not to mention people in other countries, people in far-flung parts of the world that aren't near any kind of infrastructure to speak of.
Yeah, I mean, Starlink has the ability to absolutely, upend the internet, right? There will always have to kind of be this physical infrastructure, but
Right.
they're launching a constellation of satellites. Starlink is part of SpaceX, for those of you who don't know, and they'll sort of been covering the entire United States by 2022. You can go buy yourself a satellite dish for the people who remember DirecTV or satellite TV. Looks a lot like that. You can go pre-order it now for $500. I think their internet will be $100 bucks a month, which is a little more expensive. But if you consider the cost between building out fiber to somebody's house, which might cost $50,000 per mile, versus giving them a $500 satellite dish, it's a really, really good value. And I'm sure the price of that will continue to go down over time,
Of course,
as they
of course.
they compete with technologies like 5G or fixed wireless internet, which is again sort of light satellite internet, but rather than putting it up in space, they just put it on a big cell phone tower. These are the sorts of innovations that we're seeing to sort of close that digital divide. I will say one thing about the digital divide. We spend so much time talking about availability of the internet, and that is really important. There are a lot of places that you just kind of can't, run kind of cable or whatever out to people. But the biggest driver of the digital divide is both digital literacy and affordability for people. If we want to talk about getting more people online, a lot of it is just making sure they know how to get online, right? Some people in an older generation, I know people who are 20 years old think, oh my God, who isn't online? But that's still a problem with a lot of Americans or people in the world. And just a lot of people can't afford to pay even $20, $30 a month for sort of high-speed internet, even if it's available to them. So much of this, conversation is about how the internet works for people who have it, or building it out to these people. But there's a large chunk of people who are kind of being left behind in the digital revolution, not because they don't have fiber to the house, but because they can't afford it or they don't know how to use it.
Yeah, and now thankfully, well, actually, we can talk about that in a moment. Well, no, I guess we can talk about it now. Thankfully, the Biden administration is planning to spend lots and lots and lots of money on the internet, and surely that won't end poorly, Eric, right?
Yeah. I don't remember if people remember earlier, I talked about there was maybe $20 to $30 billion in lost investment due to talk about Title II regulation. So in order to make up for all that lost money, the Biden administration is planning on spending $100 billion on broadband internet across the United States. Never mind that the studies that have come out that saying getting 100% access will cost $80 billion. 100 billion is a nice round number that you can go put in a press release and looks good. It's got a few sort of things that I think are very troubling. Again, we talk about the digital divide, right? We're talking about people that have access to no internet whatsoever. The FCC is spending $20 billion to connect those people, and they're doing so in a very smart, targeted way, right? They set up these maps to sort of look at who doesn't have internet access. They have people competitively bid to go serve these people. And they've actually spent already $10 billion will be distributed over the next 6 years 300 million of which are going to my state of Louisiana, and it's going to make a huge difference down here. There's also, we're getting a lot of money from the American Recovery Plan because we just spent $1.9 trillion. And like you said, broadband is infrastructure. So some of that money will be going there. But on top of all that, they want to spend $100 billion for, quote, future-proof networks. What does that mean? Future-proof networks in government speaks means fiber to every home in America. I think we just had a great discussion about why fiber to America is not great for everyone. For one thing, people can't necessarily afford it. Two, we have these great other technologies like 5G, fixed wireless, Starlink, to reach people in these sorts of areas. And so you might ask yourself, why fiber everywhere? Why are they sort of trying to talk about future-proofing networks? This is going on at the same time that a lot of people in Congress are talking about changing the definition of broadband from 25 megabits download speed to 3 megabits per second upload speed, which is fast enough to do anything that we're doing right now, be on Twitter, video call, et cetera, et cetera. They want to move it to 100, so-called symmetrical speed. This makes no sense for a variety of reasons. Number one, downstream traffic outnumbers upstream traffic, 14 to 1.
Yeah.
We spend a lot more time downloading stuff on Netflix than we do video calling people, or gaming, or sort of things that take upstream traffic. But the reason to do that is because all of a sudden it takes a large swath of the American people in urban and suburban areas and qualifies them as unserved. So the government can spend a lot of money building out these networks, to give money to these people. Even worse, the Biden administration has said that the profit motive is the problem with the internet. It's the reason it's so expensive. It's the reason we don't have all the service we need. So they want to spend a lot of money giving it to co-ops or government-run broadband, which has proven to be an absolute disaster and absolutely everywhere it's been tried. But you can't, if you say, only government-owned networks in unserved areas. No governments in those areas want to build government-owned networks because they're ill-suited to do so. But governments in places like New Orleans or Lafayette, which has a government-owned network in Louisiana, would love a huge subsidy from the Biden administration to go do that. So that is sort of what's going on in the Biden broadband takeover of the internet. It sounds good, right? We want to get 100% access to 100% of Americans. We're going to spend $100 billion. And once again, the rural unserved areas are going to be left behind in favor of government-owned networks. The very people who have very good, internet service as it is. Maybe it's not perfect. That's, I can't guarantee that, but it is better than the people who have nothing. And, it's putting them at the back of the line.
Yeah, it's government agencies over actually serving internet needs. And what's incredible is nothing says future-proof like building more landlines, Eric. Like, it's obvious everything is going to wireless and mobile. Like, everything is going to wireless. I foresee a time when we're going to have very little actual physical lines being used. There's basically no latency anymore for most wireless providers. And yes, with satellite there is now, but eventually there will be less of that. A landline takes so much more cost, which is great if you're doing a public works project for the government, not so much if you're actually a for-profit company trying to provide a service in the most efficient way possible. It's, everything is moving towards wireless and not just in the internet. We're seeing that, wireless has taken over telecom. This would be like saying we're going to future-proof the telephone services by putting phone lines in everyone's rooms. Like it's the opposite of future-proofing. And 100 megabyte upload and download for now is foolish because 100 megabyte upload, I don't even need that, and I have a show that I do I use 5 megabytes a second roughly to upload to stream my show. So even with 10, I'm good, and most people aren't even using that much for that. Most people, like you said, 5 is more than enough. But eventually that's going to be stupid because that'll be a ridiculously low number, and your phone will be able to do a gigabyte a second upload with no problem, with no kind of need for drilling more holes and replacing old lines with new ones. This is a public works, boondoggle, government labor type of deal. This has nothing to do with with expanding the internet. It actually does the opposite. It throws good money after bad in propping up government run internet providers who suck, and compared to their private competitors who are spending far less per consumer and providing much better options. And also it's going in, like, nothing says Green New Deal like, digging holes everywhere and having trucks go around the whole planet to drill lines into the ground that no one's going to use in 10 years. Like, it's the opposite of where we should be going.
Yeah, I'll disagree with you a little bit that fiber
Okay.
is going to remain the backbone of the internet, right? Wireless internet goes into fiber somewhere. So putting more fiber in the ground for sort of it's called backhaul, right? It's sort of, what comes off of your phone or computer or whatever. Like that is really important. But carriers continue to make large investments in fiber.
Right.
The government doesn't really need to go do that. What doesn't make sense is trying to run fiber to every home in America.
And that's what I meant. Yeah, there will always be an actual physical line somewhere, but it's going to be to like hubs and things like that, not your house and every single room in it.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, the future is wireless, and it's not just on our phones or on our laptops, right? It's the Internet of Things. It is having your car be connected. It's having your smartwatch be connected. It's having your health monitoring system being connected to the internet, right? It's your autonomous vehicle. All that requires like an investment in wireless technology. Like I said, the C-band auction brought in $80 billion because people are ready to invest in wireless technologies. It is the new big thing. People want to be first. We want America to be first in China. And that requires something just called opening up spectrum and letting, the private industry invest. There was a talk, kind of at the end of the Trump administration of having the Department of Defense, build out a 5G network. And I can think of no better way to lose to China than try to out China. But, like net neutrality, right? There's sort of this ideological component over the internet, right? It's, I believe that net neutrality is the right way to work the internet. So we need to have Title II. I believe the profit motive is wrong. So we need to have government-owned broadband. Never mind the fact that it requires billions of dollars in upfront investment. And most of them have been abject failures where people don't sign up or they've had to sell off to the private sector. That doesn't matter. But when you talk about something as important in the internet and the internet infrastructure, right, it shouldn't be ideological. It should be fact-based. It should be, the private market has proven again and again, it delivers us the stuff that we want. Trying to get government in the way is the absolute wrong way to go on this thing. Not to mention that I think we passed 100% of debt by GDP. So do we really need to spend another $100 billion on this? I know, money machine go burr, but, this is perhaps not the best way to spend it.
Well, and that's the thing. It's money machine go burr, and it's money machine go burr to, government is basically the sunken cost fallacy as policy. We've spent all this money, it's not working, clearly we need to spend more. And that's, it's throwing money at something that there are providers that are nipping at the butt to be able to go out there and provide these things and invest. Literally all the government has to do is just go, all right, you do it then. And it's like you said with the C-band, they allowed it. Now, libertarian that I am, I'd rather the government not be licensing anything. I think they should just let people, bid for it and own it and not, even have the government involved. But regardless, if you're going to go the licensing route versus the no, we'll control it and tell people who can use it route, that is definitely not going to work in the right direction. Now, before we get into some of the other stuff that Pelican Institute is doing, let's kind of put a neat little bow on this. First, let's talk about what's happening with California. They introduced, did they just pass the net neutrality aspect, or did they basically introduce their version of Title II in California? And what does that look like for the rest of the country?
Yeah, so in 2018, they went and they passed sort of their own net neutrality law, right? This was kind of coming off the hysteria, right, of Ajit Pai, ending the internet as we know it, and all these states. Oh my God, save our internet, we're going to save our people. We're going to pass net neutrality. And, it's taken a few years to sort of put it into effect, and we're starting to see it now. There's something we didn't get into, or we got into the fact that, net neutrality, you have to treat all content equally no matter what. So there's this great Veterans Health app that has a 0 rating. What does that mean? That means when you use it on your mobile phone, it doesn't count against your data cap. We think our veterans are so important, and their access to mental health is so important that you can kind of access them anytime for free. Under California's net neutrality rule, that would be illegal. So there's been this sort of big kind of kerfluffle over that. But 0 rating is available for a lot of things. T-Mobile, right, a innovative wireless company, has this agreement with Major League Baseball. I don't know if you're a baseball fan. Said if you sign up for our service, you can get MLB TV for free, and it's not going to count against your data cap. Under net neutrality, that would have been blatantly illegal because they're favoring some content over another. The government says this: we need this to protect consumers. If protecting consumers from free baseball is what you're doing, I would say that is pretty un-American.
Yeah, that's actually a good talking point. You want one of those sound bites. You go, they're protecting you from free stuff. That doesn't seem like protection. And it's not, and it's true. It's free not, and it's actual free stuff. It's free baseball, yeah, but free anything. The government's protecting you from providers enticing you to join them by giving you free stuff, and actual free stuff, not free stuff like the government, taxes you by the trillions and then gives some of it back to you if they decide you deserve it. Actual free stuff, where if you join them instead of their competitor, they just give you things in addition to the price of whatever service you're buying. What can we do to fight this, or is there anything we can do to fight it? What if someone here is saying, Eric, I want to fight as much as I can against the implementation of Title II. What can I do? What is there that we can do? Who can we contact?
Yeah, obviously the stuff in California is going through the Supreme Court, right? There's sort of a question whether or not California can sort of regulate the internet for the rest of us, because we know there's no such thing as a California or a Washington internet, right? There's at minimum, there's an American internet, but more likely there's sort of a worldwide internet, right? So, I like federalism as much as the next guy, but a proper understanding of federalism is sort of the right level of government for the right thing, right? We don't want our local government setting our national defense policy. They're pretty ill-suited to do so, and I would sort of argue that California setting the nation's internet policy is also probably a mistake.
And there's a lack of representation there. If you have one state deciding what the entire country or world's internet looks like, the rest of us are having absolutely no say in even the representatives who are deciding that.
Yeah. That's exactly right. So what can you do, right? The FCC is tough. It's an unelected body, right? You can't, vote somebody out. Otherwise, I'm sure Ajit Pai would have been voted out. I'm very glad he wasn't, and he was able to sort of get through that. But, I think as the Biden administration moves forward, right, trying to put pressure on them to pick somebody who is not going to kind of get in line with the Title II stuff is probably going to be the best thing you can do. If they start to do Title II rulemaking, you can put in comments. They have to read them. But just sort of talk to your friends and neighbors about this. Say, hey, remember that net neutrality thing that happened a few years ago and everyone got worked up and hated this one guy because he was going to destroy the internet? Remember how that didn't happen and the internet's better than ever before? I think that will go a long way, right? Sort of people let themselves get whipped into a frenzy and believe that all the bad things were going to happen. And my hope is that if they try it again, that the messaging just sort of won't sink through, that people have sort of picked up that the internet wasn't destroyed, that it's better than ever. I think sort of on the Biden broadband plan, right? If you're in a rural state, right, talk to your representative. Say, I understand closing the digital divide is important. This plan is going to leave behind the people that need it most. We're in a very close House and Senate. A few votes either way could sort of end that part of the plan. So I think on that, metric in terms of, do we want the government running the internet? Your ability to kind of stop that, I think, is actually is actually pretty high.
Cool. And vote Libertarian. He didn't say that, but I did. Okay, cool. So let's talk about, before I let you go, let's talk about some of the other stuff that you and the Pelican Institute are doing in Louisiana. I really do. And I thought about this actually before I had you on, because I had another group called For All Tennessee, and they're a Tennessee-based lobbying group, and they're working on building a think tank as well, and doing kind of the libertarian stuff or free market stuff at the statewide level. And I do think I'm going to kind of do a series of interviewing different people across the country that are doing similar things. So more on that later. But talk to us about what the Pelican Institute is doing across the board in Louisiana.
Yeah, I mean, Louisiana is a great place to live. I went to college here, moved away for a few years, and moved back because I had such a deep passion for the state. But it's one of the poor states in the country. It's one of the most unhealthy states in the country. It struggles with a lot of issues, even sort of outside my bucket of technology and innovation. So our goal is to make, Louisiana a competitive state where people want to move to, where people want to invest. And that, requires some big fundamental reforms. Occupational licensing. We license more occupations than pretty much anywhere else in the country, including florists. The fine people of Louisiana are protecting you from unlicensed flower arranging. I wish I was joking. I am not.
No, I know.
We have a very, very complicated tax structure. I was up at the Capitol today. They were discussing that. Hopefully, we'll see some great reforms. We have the highest corporate income tax rate in the Southeast, right? A lot of these southern states have been cutting taxes, being more business friendly, getting people from Illinois, New York, California to move their businesses there, right?
Other countries too.
Yeah, Tesla just moved to Texas. Louisiana is holding on. We have all these exemptions, for special interests who have been lobbying for years and years and years. We're finally starting to kind of cut away at some of that and kind of lower our tax rate, broaden the base, do all those kind of really important tax things. But that's going to be a process. It is in our Constitution. So even if the representatives pass it, the people of Louisiana are going to have to say yes. That's going to be a big lift. Education. New Orleans is kind of this hotbed for education reform after Katrina. More school choice. We're trying to push more of that. I think during the pandemic, people saw how important school choice was to the future. But sort of that's kind of our big things. Of course, I'm really working on these tech and innovation issues. We just passed something called a financial sandbox, which we're really excited about. I started opening up with Dogecoin. A sandbox just says that if you have an innovative product, we want you to come to the state of Louisiana and test it out for a few years, and then we're going to fit you in our regulatory structure, or even better, we're going to deregulate and make Louisiana a more free place, and we're going to bring in entrepreneurs who are going to make Louisiana a place that people want to go and spend their time and invest their money and live. And so that's, what we're really all about down here at the Pelican Institute. We want to be a leader in investment in jobs and education for people, but that requires, major changes at the state level. That's not going to come from Washington, D.C. It's going to require good people here in the state of Louisiana and in Baton Rouge to make the right decisions for people. And we want to help them make those right decisions.
And so your focus is on getting government out of the way of the market as much as possible so that people can have more options, so that innovators can grow homegrown there or move from other areas, so that Louisiana can be more prosperous, can be better educated, can have more choices, can be healthier. Basically, getting government as much. So it seems like an overriding theme. And I'm a little bit surprised to hear you say it, but it sounds like the overriding theme behind what you and Pelican are doing is that the less involved government is in our lives and in our choices, the better off we do. So I guess I really have one question for you. How dare you?
Yeah, right. I mean, look, government is something that we're going to have to deal with for a long time. It's something that, we want to try to shrink it when we can, but when we can't, we want it to act better, right? We talked a little bit about the FCC, right? The FCC can spend its time opening up spectrum and, pushing forward 5G, or it can spend its time trying to regulate, the internet and make it Title II. And we're going to push, for the former, not the latter, right? Yeah. So that's a lot of what we're doing down here at the Pelican Institute is shrink government when we can, empower the private sector. And when, government's going to be there, make sure it's, it's working for people. Making sure that we have just the regulations that we need, creating innovative products or programs like sandboxes, right? Modernizing our telehealth laws so more people can get access to care in Louisiana.
Yes,
we're doing some really exciting stuff with drones that I'm really excited about. I want Louisiana to be a leader in the drone industry. We've got a lot of agriculture, we've got a lot of oil and gas. We've got a lot of trade here. it's set up perfectly for sort of the drone industry to take flight. But, that's going to require, a government regulation to deal with drones. It's set up property rights, but do it in a smart, limited way that empowers the private sector.
That's awesome. Well, I'm glad you guys are doing that work. You have been a fantastic guest, Eric. Before I let you go, I want to give you a chance to say whatever you want to say. Anything you think that we didn't get a chance to talk about. Tell people how they can keep in touch with you and the Pelican Institute. Any upcoming stuff you want to promote. Eric Peterson, the floor is yours.
Oh man, I kind of do bad extemporaneously, but yeah, you can follow us on pelicanpolicy.org. You can follow me. I know Spike's going to tweet it out. Go buy Dogecoin. It's going to the moon. That's not financial advice. Please don't take that seriously.
It's not financial advice. We
but
just like the coin.
I would sort of, if I can give a message, right? The states are the laboratories of democracy. I think sort of the best time that we saw in free market policies was sort of after Obama was elected, and a lot of states said, we're going to go in a different direction. We're going to cut down regulations. We're going to cut taxes. We're going to be business friendly. Those policies trickle up to Washington, D.C., but that only happens if you get involved at the local level, decide you want to make the state the best place you can be, and really have those hotbed of innovation ideas. There's not a lot of good ideas coming from Washington, D.C. these days. I think the best ideas come out of state capitals. And that's why I work in state policy, because this is a place for innovation. This is a place to get good policy, to make people's lives better and see government work for them. And so that's why I'm so passionate about what I do. And that's why I'm really good to be on your show and talk about it. So go get involved at your state level. Let me tell you, your state rep will take your calls, and they care a lot more about what you say than your congressman. And there's some great congressmen out there, but your state reps don't get a lot of calls. And so when you go up and show up, it makes a heck of a lot of a difference.
Your state legislators are more likely to acutely affect your life on a day-to-day basis. They're more likely to listen to you. And it costs less to create groups or be involved in groups that get in front of them. And that's even more true at the local level as well. You're obviously talking like major policy, but also at like the city level. Certainly not with like the internet or something like that, but at the city level, your city council people are even easier to get a hold of. You might know them. You might go to school or go to church with them or live nearby them. And this is why I hammer away all the time. Get involved in your local communities, get involved, go to your city council meetings, go if you can to your state legislative meetings, get on the phone and on email with them, at them on Twitter, tag them on Facebook, get involved with them, make friends as much as you can, and become that squeaky wheel that won't go away about setting the markets free and setting people free, and so we can live better lives.
I disagree with you a little bit right at the end. There's a ton of internet policy that's done at the local level. You want 5G, you got to get small cells set up in your town. You go to a city council meeting, and there's a bunch of NIMBYs trying to fight that. Localities had huge fees for putting fiber in the ground. These are really local policies that can help close the digital divide. If you show up to your city council meeting, your chance of getting faster internet is way better than going to talk to the FCC or yelling at your internet provider. It is probably your local government that has more of an impact, whether or not you get fast internet service, than anybody else that you will ever deal with.
Don't take away my hobby of calling Spectrum and yelling at them. But yes, get involved in your local communities and follow Eric Peterson, follow the Pelican Institute for Public Policy. And Eric, again, thank you so much for coming on, man. Stick around. I'm going to talk with you during the intro. But folks, thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of My Fellow Americans. I think it was an absolutely great one. And another perfect example of how, the less we can get government, the more we can get government out of our way, the better. So thank you for tuning into this episode. Be sure to tune in tomorrow at 8 p.m. Eastern for the Writer's Block. Matt Wright, gosh, I forgot his name. Matt Wright, my co-host on Tuesdays, he's doing his show, The Writer's Block, and he is going to be talking with Jay Nygaard, who advocates for rights and civil disobedience in regards to green energy and going green. Jay Nygaard is best known for being arrested for putting a windmill on his own property. Yeah, his own property, his own windmill. Turns out that's what you go to jail for. So be sure to tune in and hear that story and hear how you can get involved with the energy revolution by getting government out of your backyard and letting you put what you want there. And then this weekend, I will be in Wisconsin, Eau Claire, Wisconsin, for the Libertarian Party of Wisconsin's annual convention. So for more information on that, go follow the Libertarian Party of Wisconsin. I think their website is lpwisconsin.org. I'm going to confirm that right now. Nope. Hold on one second. I can tell you where to go. I probably should have done this.
Stopping you from finding your content.
What's that?
Net neutrality stopping you from finding the Libertarian Party website.
Darn you to heck, net neutrality. No, lpwi.org. No, this was pure user error. I'd love to blame Joe Biden for this, but definitely not. lpwi.org to get more information on that convention this weekend and to register. Come on out. Meet me. I do Q&A all the time. I answer as many questions as I can. I'd like to get to meet you in person. And then join us back here next week for the Muddy Waters of Freedom, where Matt Wright and I parse through the week's events like the 2020 Wonder Boys that we are. And then join me next week right here. Oh, wait, no, I'm wrong. Next Tuesday, we're doing the old switcheroo. On next Tuesday is My Fellow Americans at 8 p.m., and my guest will be an expert in police reform. He actually was an expert witness during the Chauvin trial, so we'll be talking about that, and we'll talk about police policy. Also, next Wednesday, which is usually my show, My Fellow Americans, it's going to be the Muddy Waters of Freedom, because we're going to be live streaming and live reacting to Joe Biden's very first State of the Union address. Will Joe Biden remember where he is the whole time? Probably not. But we will be there to give you a play-by-play as it happens, so be sure to tune into that. But folks, again, thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of My Fellow Americans. I will see you, or join us tomorrow, and I will see you next week. And I just am so happy that you tuned in. What do I say here? Oh, yeah. I'm Spike Cohen, and you are the power. God bless, guys.
For an eye in a time when the blind lead the blind. Who am I to deny? I would cry when a loved one dies. I recognize that body outside, bullet holes in the body that was alive. Now confined to a chalk outline. Find out how, but you never know why. It ain't even make it to the news at 9. It ain't even make it to the news at 9. That's my sister, mother, father, brother, son. That's one of mine. All these years I close my eyes, open up to only find I'm in line.